Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amanda Weinstein,
I'm Rachel Venman.
I'm Jasmine Clark.
and this is a Suburban Women Problem. Today, we're joined by the incredible Jocelyn Benson. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you all.
It's good to see you. So, it's election season, and you are a voting rights expert. In 2020, you oversaw the most secure election in Michigan's history. So, what makes for a free and fair election?
It's a free and fair election is one in which every eligible voter has the ability to participate and do so in the way that is most convenient to them, and also have full confidence that the results of the election are an accurate reflection of the will of the people.
I love that. Ooh, I need to bottle that up and put that in my
Sounds perfect.
pocket.
Very concise definition. I love it.
I don't think the Republicans want the will of the people, though. So that's probably an issue sometimes.
Well, that's why we're in the battle over the future of our democracy. As our country becomes increasingly progressive, increasingly diverse, an inclusive, vibrant democracy is antithetical to the goals of the Republican Party, that is really more rooted in policies only supported by a small minority of citizens. So, obviously, collaboration and compromise has always got to be part of governance, but at the same time, the will of the people rules the day. And so, proud to be in this moment of history staunchly on the side of just making sure everyone can vote and have their voice heard, and the hopes that politicians across the country will ultimately get on board with that concept also.
So, Jocelyn, I'd love to hear more. I'm in Georgia, a state legislator in Georgia. So, I feel like we are kind of going in the wrong direction on a lot of things. But I would love to hear more about you expanded voting rights in your state, and just why is it so important to have easier access?
Yeah, I mean, look, I started my career in Montgomery, Alabama, investigating hate groups and hate crimes throughout the country. And I'm the daughter of two public school teachers, special education teachers. And so through all those experiences, I've seen how important it is to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table. And then living in Alabama, I was really instilled with this deep recognition of the work and the sacrifices that have come before us to ensure that one person, one vote promise in our Constitution that really defines who we are as Americans is a reality for everyone. And so for me, the work we all have to do in this moment is to make sure that those who have power in this country are directly accountable to and beholden to the citizens that they represent. And too often throughout our history, that hasn't been the case. And the history of our democracy is kind of a story of the ebb and flow, and that push and pull between citizens seeking to be fully empowered and people who represent a minority of voices trying to hold on to power that they don't actually rightfully have in a democracy. And so that's also what we're seeing unfold today in many ways. And the great thing is that while leaders in some states like Georgia may be moving in a direction that is, perhaps the wrong direction, the people are squarely on the side of democracy and inclusion, and particularly young voters and our sort of upcoming generation of voters who have seen what happens when government fails, in particular when it fails to protect them in schools. When it fails to give them access to quality education, when it fails to keep them alive when they go to school. And I have great hope of the determination of our youngest voters to ensure that governments of the future, and perhaps the post-Trump era of our country, are far more inclusive and reflective of the will of the people than they have been in years past.
Love that.
So, Jocelyn, I'm in Ohio, and we don't often throw compliments to Michigan very often as the state up north. But I do have to say, I have talked about the 2022 election in Michigan and all of the great work that has gone on in Michigan. I have to give credit where credit is due, that there's been a lot of work to get organized, and you had a plan. You've done it, and you've enacted legislation that helps real people in their lives. So could you tell us more about some of this good legislation that you've all been able to pass, and how you got to those wins in 22?
Well, there's two glimmers of hope, because I think it has always been my hope that we in Ohio could work together. With current leadership, that's just not possible, because you've got to have secretaries of state who are beholden to truth, and the law as opposed to hyperbole and lies. But that said, in just a few short years in Michigan, we went from being at the bottom of a number of turnout lists and other things to really now leading the country in many ways. And the reason why that was able to happen so quickly, where we had very low turnout, and then we had in 2020 the highest turnout election in our state's history, was because of voters. Because in 2018, voters amended our state constitution to expand voting rights, create no reason absentee voting, which was in particular very important to have in the midst of the pandemic. Voters amended our state constitution to put citizens in charge of drawing their district lines, eliminating in one fell swoop gerrymandering in our state, and drastically changing the makeup of our state legislature and our congressional delegation so that it is balanced and not tilted one way or the other. And that we have competitive districts around the state, election day registration, automatic voter registration, all implemented by the voters in 2018. As the chief election officer, I was honored to come in on the heels of that election and implement all of those changes. But it's really been a citizen-led effort in our state. And that, to me, suggests, in part because of the failure of your Secretary of State and others to try to make it harder for citizens to amend their own constitution over the summer. Now, because of that, citizens have squarely the right in Ohio to do the same thing we've done in Michigan and ensure simply that more people are a part of the process, and that citizens, not politicians, are leading the way in defining what democracy looks like.
So you're saying there's a chance. And also, did I hear you say automatic voter registration?
Yes. So I oversee the DMV in Michigan.
Love that.
Which is the BMV in Ohio, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. It makes me very popular to oversee the DMV, but we actually have reformed it to make it work better for our citizens, eliminating wait times and all the rest. But in addition to that, we were able to quickly implement automatic voter registration once the citizens enacted it in our Constitution in 2018. And we did that by simply ensuring every eligible citizen, when they come to get their driver's license or state ID, that they're automatically registered to vote if they're eligible to be registered, unless they opt out. It has dramatically boosted our registration rolls. We're not done yet. We've still got more work to do to ensure young voters are automatically registered to vote. But it's a no-brainer policy. It helps no party. It only helps voters. And it makes administrative elections so much easier.
And what rights do we have to register? I don't have to register for my right to free speech. I just get it.
Yeah.
It's a right.
Yeah.
Voting is my right. I am now of age. It should be a right that I don't register. I get it.
Well, voter registration was enacted after the Civil War as a part of the same package that included poll taxes, literacy tests, felon disenfranchisement laws. It's just the only one that survived until now, and has become a thing that is part of our elections, which is fine. We just have to make sure it's not the barrier to voting that it was originally intended to be when those enacted it in the 1860s.
That is actually something I did not realize. I did not know that until just now.
Fascinating. Wow. I feel bad. I've just been sitting here listening to this great conversation, and I forgot that I'm supposed to be part of it. In 2012, you founded Military Spouses for Michigan. Can you tell me a little bit about, or our listeners, I guess, why you founded it and what the organization does?
Yeah, it was meant to really uplift and empower the voices of spouses of service members who at that point in 2012 were deeply involved in overseas battles, in particular in Afghanistan. And as a military spouse myself, I experienced firsthand how isolating that experience can be, because your husband is overseas in a war zone. And unless you're living on a base among other spouses, which I wasn't, I was in Michigan, it's hard. No one can really understand what that's like. But it was an incredible way to feel empowered because of our experience as military spouses, not disempowered, which oftentimes you feel if you are in an environment where you're experiencing something very visceral and real, waiting for at any moment to get a knock at the door and be told that something terrible has happened to your spouse. Bonding over that instead becomes very empowering. And we found ways to uplift each other, and ultimately were selected in 2013 to march in the presidential inauguration parade, representing not just Michigan, but military spouses everywhere. It was really great. And it taught us all of the empowering aspect of being a military spouse.
Wow.
Well, I was a military spouse in 2013, so thank you for representing me in that.
I love that. So, Jocelyn, not to switch gears too much or pivot too much, but you did mention that you used to live in Montgomery and
Yeah.
that you earlier in your career researched white supremacist and neo-Nazi organizations. Here we are in 2023, and unfortunately, these groups have not stopped being a serious issue. In fact, for whatever weird reason, it almost feels like they're digging in and gaining ground in,
Yeah.
some weird way. So I guess like thinking back on that work, was there anything from then that still sticks with you today? And have you seen these groups change at all since then?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think the thing that I've seen change the most is their recognition and amplification from the former president himself. Uh, and when Charlottesville happened several years ago, it was a reminder of the evil that lurks in many communities and amongst extremist elements of our society. Much of which I had been, studying and doing undercover work, investigating in my younger years. And it's in many ways always been there. There's sometimes this myth feeling that after the civil rights movement, it went away, or when people stopped marching in the streets in hoods, although that still does also happen. But when it's stopped happening with such prevalence that perhaps it was diminishing, and really what the former president brought to the forefront is this very dark underbelly of our country and our society that still exists and rooted in hate and oftentimes commits crimes rooted in hate as well. And what also I think, in particular, over the tragedy of the recent weeks, really illuminates is the connectivity of hate to and disempowerment all across our world, from anti-Semitism and the rise of neo-Nazism globally as well, which has been very real. In many countries, in addition to our own, connected to the rise and ongoing amplification of white supremacy and hatred of Muslims and all the rest. And it really underscores the unfinished work that we all have to do to ensure our country still lives up to its ideals, and that we become, as we have the opportunity to be, a truly inclusive democracy that amplifies and recognizes and honors the voice of all communities in our country and ensures everyone's a part of the governing process.
That should be the goal. I love that. I love that.
I
Oh,
think
and
it's just really important. I think it's really important to highlight that we're not dealing with anything new. It's much more out in the open, but it's not worse. And I mean, there's a little bit of comfort in that. I mean, even if people are feeling emboldened, I mean, that is a disheartening trend, but we also need to see it's here, and we have the power and the capability to deal with it.
We need to push it back down, though. Seriously,
Yeah. No,
the
yeah,
emboldening, the
absolutely.
empowering of such hate is really disheartening. And I would also say, when you have states that are also trying their best to not even allow for that ugly history to be taught,
Yeah.
so that people don't have context and aren't able to really connect what's happening now to things that have already happened, because the things that have already happened, we recognize those are bad things. That's why those people for so very long were in the outskirts, or they weren't empowered to be
Sure.
out front, because society had said, no, that's bad. But then if you take away that history, then all of a sudden, as they are more bold in their approach, there are also less people who have the historical context to understand that, we've been here before, we stopped this before, we can stop it again. So I don't know, wanted to throw that out there. My daughter's in 9th grade now, but I want to say in 5th grade, she was taught that the Klan was something that happened a long time ago, and like they don't exist anymore. And I was like, yeah, maybe not the Klan, as maybe they're not wearing like the hoods and doing weird rituals and stuff, but like it kind of still exists. And I really wanted her to understand that, yes, it's history class. It was history class, but it was still something that you have to be mindful of even today, now in the 2020s.
Well, it's interesting working for the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Klan and neo-Nazi organizations and other white supremacist organizations very much have never gone away. They just operated on the fringes. And then when the internet came to the forefront in the 90s, which is when I was starting to investigate them, that became an organizing tool, and social media even more so. And then you have the former president come in and give them, a microphone. And so it's incumbent upon us to teach the next generation the history, because it's directly connected to what's happening in the present.
Oh, and such an important org you mentioned. So I've worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center on voting rights in Florida, actually. And also, brings back to how important voting rights are for our democracy and for us to continue on in this country and to get, move in a positive direction and move forward.
There's a reason why the Voting Rights Act was the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement. So schools and integrating workplaces and lunch counters, all of that is critical. But if we don't have the right to vote, we don't have the ability to fight for any of that in a way.
It's not sustainable. Right.
Yeah.
So you're a marathon runner, and you actually completed the Boston Marathon while you were 8 months pregnant. So what's more exhausting, a physical race or a political race?
Oh, wow. They're similar in that they're both as exhausting as you allow them to be. And if you can funnel that exhaustion into sort of mentally into helping you persevere, then you cross the finish line successfully. So they're very, very similar in that regard. And you learn to pace yourself as well. Exhaustion teaches you how to pace yourself so that you don't overreact to negative things and on the political side, or if you don't push too hard and run too fast early on the physical side. So it's all a lesson of how to get things done, but at the same time. So I find that they feed into the other. And certainly running
that's amazing.
8 months pregnant was a whole other kind of experience, unrelated to other things.
All right, that is the end of our rapid fire questions and our interview. It has been so amazing talking to you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I hope to see you guys again sometime. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So that conversation was amazing. And she is amazing. And,
so impressive.
I've seen her speak and, I really love what's going on in Michigan, but to have her here today and to actually talk to her today, it just solidifies everything that I've seen about her. I love the connection, working at Southern Poverty Law Center, learning about extremism and then going straight into voting rights and seeing the connection between the two. And just not just talking about the negative, but also showing the power of the citizens to enact amazing things when they have that power. So I loved it.
Yeah. I was going to say, she's very hopeful, even about look, here's what's going on. Here's what we need to do. And I was like, oh, this is very hopeful. It was exactly what I needed today to feel hopeful of look, things aren't perfect. Here's what we can do to improve them. And I was like, yes. Yeah. Wow. And I've done some amazing things.
Ever since I interviewed Alyssa Slotkin, which was June, early June, and another impressive woman from Michigan. And she talked a lot about, that in Michigan, they had a plan and they worked hard, and it started the day after the 2016 election. So it took them a long time to realize the results of their hard work. And then Alyssa also had so much hope that, we still have our vote and we, so we have power. And I think that's another thing that the chaos is meant to do, is to make us feel hopeless, to take that, optimism and the American dream, the, possibility of self-governance, all that. It's meant to chip away at our faith in our system.
That is such a good point. All of the chaos and the extremism, it really disempowers everyday people. And that is the goal, to disempower us, to quiet us, to make sure our voices aren't heard. And it's something that we have to make sure that we push back on, and that we feel empowered, and that everyday people are empowered, that they have a voice, they have a vote, and it matters. All right. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. We'll see you again next week on another episode of the Suburban Women Problem.